welcome to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. We are in the middle of a gigantic worldwide combat between the forces of progress and revolution on the one side and the reactionaries, the finance oligarchs, and their minions on the other. The negative news, of course, the bankruptcy of Detroit imposed by the Little Hitler law of Governor Snyder of Michigan and his hand-picked bankruptcy administrator. This is putting 700,000 people, largely black, under austerity dictatorship. It's time to rally around the idea of no cuts for people, that the bankers eat the losses. The bankers, the bondholders, the derivatives mongers will eat the losses coming from Detroit. We've also got reactionary forces in the Congress gathering. Senator Mike Lee, the descendant of the infamous Mountain Meadows massacre by the Mormons against peaceful Arkansas pioneers of the Fancher Party back in 1858. That same Mike Lee says he wants to shut down the government if that's what it takes to make sure that Americans don't get the idea that they have the right to health care. Not that Obamacare necessarily would be the reality of health care for all, but the idea of it is the thing that Lee is seeking to fight. But at the same time, these reactionaries have taken it on the chin in two places in the world. One is Egypt, the other is in Brazil. In Egypt, and we'll devote the first part of the program to this, the new Nasserism is abroad. As you know, people who know this program, I have been looking for a Nasser in Egypt since January 2011. Officers, younger officers who are disgusted by the imperialist kowtow of their superiors, people like Field Marshal Tantawi, and disgusted also by the other imperialist measures that they've had to put up with. And it looks like Nasserism is reemerging, and this is the worst possible outcome for the imperialists. And you can see this yourself. You go back to the 1950s. What's the imperialist policy? Support the Muslim Brotherhood against Nasser. Nasser is the kind of anti-imperialism that works, seizing the Suez Canal, kicking out the British, standing up to a joint attack by the British, the French, and the Israelis, with a little help from the U.S. and the Soviets. And Nasser then, of course, went on to build the Aswan High Dam and carry out other important development projects in Egypt. This is the anti-imperialism that works. And compared to this, the really treacherous betrayals of the Muslim Brotherhood, they just can't stand up. So today, for those of you who didn't get it, Friday, July 26th, the Washington Post op-ed page, Egypt's new Nasser, ? The imperialists are not happy about this. Then we've also got Pope Francis in Brazil. This is an exercise in populism. This is a pope who's concerned about the slums, a pope who's concerned about people in jail. He's concerned with fighting the drug plague. I would say he's taking aim at CIA drug running and Wall Street drug money laundering. If you knock out those two components, you are essentially freeing humanity from the scourge of narcotics and all of the violence that is connected with narcotics. You can see that Francis is pushing an anti-austerity message. He's concerned with poverty. He's concerned with exclusion. He's concerned with the greed of the ruling classes. He's concerned with social justice. There's a tremendous revival of Catholic social doctrine and the social gospel of Christianity in general. And we'll get to the counter forces inside the Catholic Church in just a minute. But right now, the word is from Copacabana that he's speaking to 2 million people. One of the bigger crowds of the year, I think. 2 million people is a pretty good result, and it probably would have been more, except that the public transportation system was stretched to the point of virtual breakdown. Now let's go to Egypt first. We'll get to Pope Francis a little bit later. The counter coup is rolling on. The speech made by General Sisi, Sisi, suggests that Sisi may actually be the new Nasser. I can't be 100% sure of this, but I've been talking to you in recent weeks, or indeed in the last 2.5 years, about the need for Nasserism, the need for Nasserist colonels and more junior, younger generals to come forward and do something to save Egypt from the twin menaces of the International Monetary Fund on the one hand and their stooges over at the Muslim Brotherhood on the other. And it looks like General Sisi may be the man. I can't be 100% sure. And, of course, we want to remember the key role of Hamdin Sabahi, the political organizer of Nasserism. And I would imagine that these forces might be ready to converge for the good of the country. Sisi, on Wednesday, called for the biggest possible turnout of people in the streets of Egypt, and he said, we want a mandate against violence and terrorism. And the violence and terrorism, I'm afraid, does mean the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood on June 15th said they wanted a jihad against Syria. What they mean by that is that they want to enter the Syrian civil war on the side of the terrorist death squads to save the terrorist death squads, the terrorists, from otherwise likely destruction at the hands of the Syrian Arab army, Hezbollah, and Iranian forces operating inside Syria. And at that point, it became clear. We also know that Morsi, the now disgraced former president of Egypt, this Morsi had been cavorting with all kinds of terrorists. Remember the terrorist group that had killed 60 to 70 tourists at the pyramids back in the late 90s. He had put one of those perpetrators in as the governor of the province where the Valley of the Kings. I'm sorry, not the pyramids, but this is Upper Egypt, right? This is up the Nile. This is where the Valley of the Kings and so forth, right? All of that. The governor of that area, right? The main tourist area, other than Cairo. That guy is now or was until the counter coup. I don't know what's happened to him in the meantime. But that guy was from the group that had killed 60 to 70 tourists just about 15 years earlier. So this is terrorism, right? In other words, getting retired terrorists and putting them in as provincial governors. I'm sorry, that's allied with terrorism. The other thing we should point out is Egypt can be usefully compared to Tunisia. What's going on in Tunisia right now is they've just had another assassination of an important leftist and indeed Nasserist leader. This is Brahmi, Brahmi, popular leader, an important politician in in Tunisia, has been assassinated apparently by the same Salafist killer who had killed another leftist leader, Bel Aid, back in January, I think, of this year, 6 months ago, approximately. So that's a Salafist, right? The Tunisian authorities said that they've traced the gun that killed Brahmi and killed Bel Aid, and it's a Salafist gun runner. Well, that's close enough. That's good enough to link that to the Muslim Brotherhood. So there we go, and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Based on the pictures you can see on Al Jazeera, France 24, Russia Today, looks like the crowd for the Egyptian army are beating the Muslim Brotherhood crowds hands down. So the popular legitimacy is with the army. And the IMF is not happy. The U.S. never wanted the counter coup. Remember, Obama, Susan Rice, Ann Patterson, the U.S. ambassador, fought to keep Morsi in power until the bitter end, and sometimes beyond the bitter end in the case of Patterson, because they wanted Egypt to attack Syria and because they wanted to keep Egypt as a stooge and a victim of the bloodsuckers at the International Monetary Fund. So that is now over. And what we had then is on Wednesday of this week, General Sisi coming forward saying, come out, people of Egypt, come into the streets, come into the public squares, give me a mandate against violence and terrorism. So we got dueling demonstrations, and I think the Muslim Brotherhood is losing. It's very hard to find anybody who's willing to say that, right? RT doesn't seem to know who to support. Certainly Al Jazeera is backing the Muslim Brotherhood. Those were their friends all along. France 24 also now joining in the general imperialist tendency to turn against the generals. So General Sisi made this speech, and he, as you've seen these pictures of him, he was wearing his full military uniform, and he was wearing his sunglasses. And the sunglasses have scared the hell out of the imperialists. Oh, my God, he's wearing sunglasses. He looks like Gaddafi. He looks like Nasser. He looks like somebody who scares us. A good example, on the Diane Rehm show this morning on National Pentagon Radio, we had Moises Naim, journalist and scholar, I guess, who generally speaks for the International Monetary Fund, with which I believe he was once affiliated. And he says the choice is the rule of law or the rule of mobs. And I suppose for him, Morsi means the rule of law, and the 20 million people that came out against Morsi, that's the rule of mobs. What hypocrisy from the IMF when it was a question of installing the IMF puppet Monti in Italy. Were they concerned about elections? No, they said, go get him out of his university and make him the prime minister. No election. And similarly in Greece, when Papandreou said, let's have a national referendum about austerity, the IMF said, no referendum. We're going to install Samaras as our stooge with an IMF puppet from the Boston Federal Reserve as his finance minister. And the same thing with Rajoy in Spain, right? The Lehman Brothers finance minister in that case, right? He won an election, but nobody knew they were getting Lehman Brothers. And by the way, if you look at that French train crash last week and the Spanish train crash this week, and then look at various bridges that have fallen down in the United States and the train crash in Connecticut, you know what the common denominator is? Killer cuts, genocidal austerity. Austerity kills, and austerity has got to be rolled back. So fight against austerity like your life depended on it, because your life does depend on it. So the U.S. media are turning against the army. They don't like General Sisi. He's the new Nasser in their eyes. We've got that article in the Washington Post. Let's just sample this for a minute. General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Egypt's new deputy prime minister and de facto strongman, a strongman. They don't like strong men. They want weak men who cave to the IMF, like Morsi. The new strongman has called on Egyptians to take to the streets Friday to give the armed forces and police a mandate to crack down on violence and terrorism. With that call, the July 3rd deposition of elected President Mohamed Morsi looks increasingly like a Nasser-style military takeover rather than the popular revolution Morsi's secular opponents claim. Look, Nasser was the essence of a popular revolution, one that was strong enough to deliver progress, to deliver economic development, to deliver national independence, to kick out the British imperialists and keep out the French, the British, the Israelis, the U.S., and everybody else with a little bit of help from the Soviets. In January 2011, let's remember, the overthrow of Mubarak was done by the army, right? It was helped along by 10 million people in the public square. This time, Morsi got, in June, 20 million people against him. So the debate goes on National Pentagon Radio. Is it a coup? Is it a popular coup? The answer is it's a counter coup to prevent two wars. The attack on Ethiopia, which was discussed by Morsi's lunatic clique, except that they were on public television and they didn't know that. They were on live. And then the other one, the other monstrous festival of terrorism, was June 15th in Cairo when Morsi publicly broke diplomatic relations with Syria. Now, Morsi did not govern by the rule of law. At the same time that he capitulated to the International Monetary Fund, you can say, well, that's his right. He promised to raise the standard of living of the poorest workers and the poorest peasants. And then he sold out to the IMF. He doubled the price of gasoline, raised the sales tax, promised the value-added tax, began attacking and attriting the subsidy system upon which the poor masses of Egypt must depend until some miracle of 10 to 20 million jobs comes along. Until then, you better keep those subsidies intact, and Sadat's ghost will tell you what happened to him in 1977. He was almost ousted when he tried to tamper with the bread subsidy. But at the same time that Morsi caved to the IMF, he put out what he called the presidential constitutional decree saying, I'm the president and I'm above judicial review. I'm above judicial review. I can do anything I want, and the courts can't review any of it. That's not democracy. That's not the rule of law. Get serious. The IMF had no problem with Morsi saying he was above the judicial branch. They had no problem with that. Morsi says, I'm above the law. IMF says, go Morsi, you're great. But now, when the tables have turned, the IMF discovers the rule of law. Oh, my God. Moses Naim today, the rule of law or the rule of mobs. I've never heard so much incredible hypocrisy, right? We could bring, if we had time, 25, 50, 100 examples of the IMF trampling on the applicable laws. And, of course, who are these people? Dominique Strauss-Kahn has been indicted today as a pimp, a procurer, a Macron, Dominique Le Macron, and his successor, the supposedly clean hands, Madame Lagarde. Madame Lagarde is up to her neck in a corruption scandal of bribery and other dirty dealing. So, one of the themes of today's broadcast, we are dealing with a bankruptcy of the world financier ruling class, and I mean moral and political. They cannot rule. They cannot be allowed to continue. Fire the ruling class. Fire the ruling class is the most basic of all demands. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Calling your attention, as always, Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net. Keep up with everything, including the very hot New York City election campaign. We'll be talking about that later in the broadcast. The Randy Credico candidacy on the tax Wall Street ticket. We hope to put that up there with Egypt and with Brazil. Make that New York City as the number 3, where Wall Street takes it on the chin. And there's only one way to make Wall Street take it on the chin. Hit them in the La Banza. Make them pay. Get them in the pocketbook. 1% nationwide, but in the case of New York City, with Credico, 0.5% on all turnover, buying and selling of stocks, bonds, derivatives, $1 million exclusion for the little people, and, of course, no tax on people taking money out of their own accounts. It's a sales tax. It means that the ownership of these rotten, toxic instruments has changed. So, in Tunisia, the Ennahda party, that's the Muslim Brotherhood party that took advantage of the Jasmine revolution at the beginning of 2011. Interestingly enough, they were elected to write a new constitution, and according to what I've been able to gather, they've completely failed. So here we have the Muslim Brotherhood, a model of mendacity. They lie and lie and lie, and they do it with a kind of naive impudence, as if they think nobody's listening. Nobody compares what they're doing now to what they said yesterday. They are greedy for power. They are oligarchs. They are the rich. They are the 1%. They are stooges of the International Monetary Fund. They're in an alliance with the CIA. They were founded by British intelligence in Egypt back in the 1920s. So I think this is pretty much an open and shut case. And they are trying to wreck the Iran-Syria-Hezbollah axis, which is the main, or has been up to now, the main axis of anti-imperialist resistance. And I think we can pay tribute to President Assad of Syria. His ability to fight off the imperialists now for 2.5 years has to a large degree opened the door to these Egyptian developments by forcing the imperialists to turn to Egypt and demand the Egyptian army deployed into Syria to kill the Syrians. And remember, this was once the same country for a couple of years, back in the 50s and 60s. This then forced the hand of these Nasserist generals, forced them to come forward and oust the warmonger tyrant IMF stooge Morsi. Now, Morsi has been indicted today for contacts with Hamas. Hamas is very dirty. Hamas has essentially gone into the pay of Qatar. Hamas must be seen essentially as a gang paid for by the emir over there in Doha, who also funds, he's tried to fund the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups. And this is now getting into a faction fight. One thing we just saw yesterday in the Gaza Strip, right under Hamas rule, the Saudi television Al Arabiya has been kicked out. So we're getting a kind of a people choosing sides. In Egypt, it's Al Jazeera, the voice of the emir of Doha. They've been kicked out. In Gaza, a much smaller area, needless to say, it's the Saudi television that has been kicked out because there appears to be a rivalry between the more adventurous sort of Philippe Egalite pseudo-revolutionary line coming out of Qatar and Doha compared to the Saudis, who are they seem to rely more on the old line Salafis, and there's a fight here also about money. So this is what's going on now. I'm also told on this National Pentagon Radio that no government in the world so far has recognized the counter-coup government. In other words, President Mansour and Baradei and Beblawi and, of course, General Sisi, that government has not been the recipient of foreign recognition. I don't know what Russia is waiting for. As a matter of fact, I would stress again, the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. You want to count for something in the world, you get into Egypt and you do it fast. You get in there with all kinds of support and political support and diplomatic recognition and stop dithering, because this is now the possibility of a new political direction in the world. Now, remember, the army has done two things in Egypt. The first is they have cut off conversations with the International Monetary Fund, in spite of the presence of Baradei and the Prime Minister, actually, Beblawi. They're not talking to the IMF. Those guys would normally have an IMF pedigree, but no, they're saying we will not even discuss dismantling our subsidy system. We will not even discuss killer austerity, genocidal cuts coming from the IMF. Great day in the morning. And as of last Saturday, the new foreign minister of this government has said that under no circumstances will Egypt engage in a jihad against Syria, and indeed they're looking for a way, it sounds like to me, cut through the diplomatic prose, they're saying they want to reopen diplomatic relations with Syria, but there will be no jihad, there will be no war. Now, some people are still harping on, but the Egyptian army gets $1.5 billion from the U.S., right, as if that were the only game in town. Somehow, through, I don't know what, through persuasion, blackmail, I don't know, the stick and the carrot, or the stick and the garret, the army in Egypt, the new government, the counter-coup government, has gotten about $12 billion from the Saudis from Kuwait, from the Emirates, not from Qatar, not from Doha. They're the odd man out. Their adventurous Philippe Egalité policy is a failure. So $12 billion is better than $1.5 billion, and $12 billion with few strings is better than the U.S. $1.5 billion, where they come and meddle and interfere with your sovereignty and so forth. So remember that the people in the Egyptian government and armed forces were horrified by Morsi proposing to swing Egypt into line in this apocalyptic confrontation between Sunnis and Shiites, which is the centerpiece of U.S., British, Israeli, NATO, and all other evil forces there in the Middle East. So they don't want that. Right now, they're not looking for a fight with Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, as long as Egypt is unwilling to go along with that lunatic scenario. That scenario is fatally crippled. So we're going to be looking anxiously to see what happens in Egypt. My guess, from what I can see just on these TV screens, that they hesitate to draw the conclusion. But General Sisi is beating the Muslim Brotherhood by a mile because it looks like he's got the 20 million, and that goes from Alexandria to Cairo. As far as I can see in Cairo, you've got Tahrir is for the army, and there's a big demonstration at the presidential palace. It's only, ironically, in Nasser City that you have a smaller demonstration by the Muslim Brotherhood, which the TV networks are doing everything to make look equally big. Now, this also then reflects into Syria. Now, remember, when we say Syria, it's not just Syria. It means Hezbollah and Iran, because those three have to maintain their existence and their cooperation. So somebody says, oh, Syria is just a side issue or a distraction. It is not. If Syria goes down, then Hezbollah is in terrible shape, and Iran is threatened more immediately, whether they know it or not. Some of them do. There's a big faction fight in the U.S., and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Keep up with all of this at Tarpley.net and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. Also, keep up with the Credico campaign. The principal agitational focus that we have from now until November is to use the New York City mayoral contest, which is now back on the map, not just Virginia, not just New Jersey. Those are relatively sterile situations as far as we can see. There's just a hope that Willie Araujo in New Jersey may get on the scoreboard with the Wall Street sales tax there. But the New York event is going to be critical because of the communications, the publishing, and all the obvious stuff, the size of it. Keep up with that. So that's Credico2013.org, CREDICO 2013.org. Now, what it's going to be is we're in the process of getting the signatures. We need 7,500 signatures for Randy Credico for the Wall Street sales tax, and this is now the Tax Wall Street Party. You don't have to be a Democrat. You can be anything as long as you're a New York City registered voter. Go to the Credico2013.org, and you will see day by day the places where the signature gathering teams are operating. And rather than make them come to you, we would ask you to go to them so that you just line up, sign up, and then you've done something world historical. You want to do something world historical this summer. Without the Wall Street sales tax, I'm afraid the situation of humanity is tragic. With the Wall Street sales tax, to defeat the finance oligarchs right in their own bailiwick, or at least to make that the main issue, is obviously it's the fulfillment of everything a lot of well-meaning but naive people went into Occupy in order to get, right? They thought they wanted to do some permanent damage to those financier oligarchs. They wanted to do something to permanently cut the power of the bankers and financiers. Unfortunately, the misleadership of Occupy didn't allow that, but now you've got something different. Now you've got actual programmatic leadership, a programmatic campaign that doesn't depend on clowning and protesting, doesn't even depend on personality, depends on program. And that's your chance right now. So go to Credico 2013 several times next week. Find out where those signature gathering things are located. Go to them and sign up. Make it easy for Credico and the rest of us to do this. All right. So Syria. We have this amazing situation, and it really is amazing. You pick up the Washington Post, right? You're an insider here in the nation's capital. You pick up the Washington Post of last Tuesday, and you find that an act of war has been approved in the Congress, and a week earlier, sometime a week before it became known, and you don't get to know this until it comes out through some kind of a leak. I think this is an absolute scandal. You want to see a scandal, I think this beats out anything about individual privacy. This is now, do they have the right to vote for a war and not even tell you? So there it is. We're told that the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence had voted secretly the week before. So I think it's in the, I'm trying to find the article. I think it's Tuesday, July 23rd, that we get this this shocking piece of news. And they don't tell you this until it comes out. It sort of filters out. It seeps out. Yeah, here it is. Page A4. Intelligence panels approve arms aid to Syrian opposition. Plans call for routing. Routing. The rout is what's going on among the death squads, boys. Don't look now. You're coming just in time to be part of the rout. Plan calls for routing light weapons to rebel fighters through the CIA. So here it is. Karen DeYoung. The House and Senate Intelligence Committees have approved CIA weapon shipments to opposition fighters in Syria, allowing the Obama administration to move ahead on the stalled program. Senior congressional and administration officials said Monday, anonymous. Oh, by the way, there's a war going on, and it's anonymous. Both the House and Senate panels voted on the administration's plan last week, officials said. And Mike Rogers, reactionary Republican, RR from Michigan, probably one of the worst of these perpetrators, right? He's providing material support to terrorism. Mike, say it isn't so. By the way, we just well, we'll get to that in a minute. This awareness is now growing, right? If you support the Syrian rebels, you're actually supporting Al-Qaeda, and that can have ugly consequences at the polls. The agreement allows money already in the CIA budget to be reprogrammed for the Syrian opposition. So this is a covert operation approved by Obama, and that's a crime. That's also folly, right? It's worse than a crime. It's a mistake, as the French cynic would say. But it's a covert operation by the CIA to deliver these weapons. And they had Biden going up there. They had Brennan going up there, the head of the CIA. And, of course, John Forbes Kerry of Skull and Bones, right? And remember that this entire thing was the fruits of the attempted coup by Kerry on the afternoon of June 12th, when, with the help of Foreign Secretary William Hague of Perfide Albion, Kerry tried to start the bombing of Syria, was fought back by Dempsey, and then somehow, as a sop to Kerry and his warmonger faction, Obama, who I don't think wanted to do this, had to grant weapons for the Syrian death squads. So Other parts of this article are that this is a very modest program. Now, we've also got the letter written by General Dempsey, the guy who stopped Kerry from immediately starting the bombing, has now written a letter to Senator Carl Levin of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And Dempsey then here goes through in a very sober, pessimistic, but rational way the options, and he points out that these options are all acts of war, that they all represent pretty much a leap in the dark because they all entail unpredictable consequences. So Dempsey says, if you want to go beyond humanitarian intervention, which we're already doing, he says, you could arm and train the death squads. So that's going to cost you about $500 million. You could attack key military assets of the Assad government using standoff missiles. In other words, aircraft maybe 100 miles out would fire into Syria. Problem with that is here you're dealing with a country which is not exactly defenseless, and there are these interesting Yakonsk anti-ship cruise missiles, which are designed to sink aircraft carriers at a range of 100 to 150 miles. So that may not be the cakewalk that some warmonger theoreticians like Anthony Cordesman may think. The sinking of an aircraft carrier would be the end of an era. Would take us back to, I think, 1942 is the last time that a full-fledged U.S. attack carrier was sunk in action, and in that case by the Japanese, I think, in and around the Battle of Midway. So arm and train, $500 million. Standoff is about $1 billion. There are a couple of other options. We'll be back in our second hour in just a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, and looking again at these pictures of the huge turnout in the pro-Army, pro-Sisi, anti-Muslim Brotherhood, anti-Morsi, anti-war, anti-IMF demonstrations. We have to say that the spirit of President Gamal Abdel Nasser 40 years after his death is more powerful than all of the machinations of this wretched Muslim Brotherhood, so-called, right? Not Muslim and not a brotherhood, I guess we're empowered to say, or if we leave that maybe to others. But there it is. The imperialists are not happy. You can see for yourself, do it empirically. Check the tone of the news coverage, and you will see, oh, they're getting to be concerned about the rule of law. Oh, my God, is it going to be mobs? Oh, the IMF worried about the rule of law. How about that? Will wonders never cease? So this is the oligarchy taking it on the chin. So General Dempsey wrote a letter to Senator Levin. Now, General Dempsey, let's just remember, had been in a clash with Walnuts McCain. General Dempsey, because of his loyal service to Obama, right? He's Obama's tame general, right? This is Obama's guy now. Dempsey seems to have tied his wagon to Obama. Obama wants to give him 2 more years as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And at a hearing for that in the Senate, McCain tried to bait him, oh, what are the relative dangers? Either if you don't do anything or if you do something, what is it going to look like? And this was really ugly, right? This was McCain threatening to, put a hold on Dempsey, to filibuster him. He's backed down since because he's getting negative feedback on his warmonger tantrum. But Dempsey then went on to formulate these options to try to show these clowns how dangerous they all are, right? This is not a warmonger letter from Dempsey. This is an attempt to avoid the worst. He stresses that all of the options have unintended consequences. All of them are acts of war, and many of them would empower the extremists or unleash the very chemical weapons the U.S. claims to be so concerned about. Although, of course, when the Russian government proves that the rebels use chemical weapons, sarin gas, poison gas, no, they're not concerned about that. So what are the options? We've just gone through the arming and training of the death squads, probably in Turkey and Jordan. That's $500 million. The use of these standoff missiles, that's about $1 billion. The no-fly zone, and he goes through what's the no-fly zone. The no-fly zone, according to Dempsey, would require hundreds of ground and sea-based aircraft, intelligence, and electronic warfare support, and enablers for refueling and communications. Estimated costs are $500 million up front initially, averaging as much as $1 billion per month over the course of a year. Now, I'm wondering, does that count the planes you're going to lose? Because you will lose some. This is going to be the end of the cakewalk theory. Right? This is not Serbia in 1999. This is the S-300 and even some of the more modern examples of the S-300. And the way you can tell that is that one NATO jet coming in from Turkey got slammed. That's the capability. The Israelis, of course, they do a lot of bombing, but the Syrians have correctly exercised restraint, right? They don't want to hand anybody the pretext for the big war, right? They want to make it clear that the aggressor is going to be the Israelis and NATO and not Syria. And then we have the safe zones. The safe zones are carve out parts of Turkey and Jordan and use those as terrorist bases, but then defend those safe zones with air and ground assets, including troops. And then the worst of them all is seizing the Syrian chemical weapons deposits, the alleged ones anyway, and that means what? Taking over 10, 12, 15, 20 places in the country, and then defending that against the Syrian army, right? Not likely to be invulnerable, right? The Anglo-American supermen will not come out of that unscathed. So, says Dempsey, quite wisely, this is a bad idea. If we read the Capitol Hill press, which is always a source of enlightenment if you know how to read between the lines, I have to see if this is Politico or The Hill, but yes, it's Politico. Politico of Tuesday, July 23rd, article by Philip Ewing. Hagel warns the Congress that the U.S. troops are, quote, close to the breaking point. He stresses that the Hill must be reasonable on the budget. You can imagine, you're a veteran. You fought in Afghanistan several tours. You fought in Iraq several tours. Now you're coming back and you're told, surprise, the Republican Party is cutting your pay by 10% and your pension is going to be cut. And all of the support, right, the Head Start for your kids and the food stamps that you live on is all being cut. Well, that's the breaking point, right? Maybe some Nasserists will finally emerge here, right? That would be refreshing. That's not the U.S. tradition, but could happen, right? The Republicans want to find out. They better keep doing what they're doing. Now, we're told as of today, RT says that the CIA is moving arms in Jordan. They've got arms on the ground. Now, allegedly, these are small arms and ammunition, right? It's tokenism. They say tokenism as early as July. Well, if they're on the ground now, it's almost August. As soon as August. So those weapons may be on the ground in August. Whether this is enough to save General Idris and his group of CIA Golden Boys, that I do not know. I rather doubt it. I think the die is cast, and the Stalingrad, which occurred June 5th in Qusair, with the liberation of that city by the Syrian Arab Army, by Hezbollah, and by their Iranian associates, that has essentially determined the collapse phase of this rebellion. Right? We may be in late 1864, to put it in U.S. terms. Right? There's still some fighting, but the turning point, I believe, has occurred. It doesn't mean that there won't be some surprises. Right? Remember, Jubal Early was able to burn Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, in the summer of 1864, even though the Confederacy was doomed. So some things like that may happen. But if you keep your eyes on the big picture, it looks to me like it's getting to be rough. Also because the death squads are now fighting among themselves, right? The other turning point, really, is the assassination of Hamami, the CIA loyal guy, right? At least through Idris, right? Part of Idris's military council in the Syrian Free Army, SFA. The killing of Hamami by the emir, the coastal emir of the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant, that has led to a lot of infighting, a lot of killing of the death squads. Death squad fratricide has been the order of the day. So this puts them in rough shape. Therefore, it would be good to have that meeting of Obama with Putin, because I think what would come out of that is some deal that would lead to the U.S. Backing off and cooling it. Let me also point out, though, that in the Strangelove community, we have a veteran Strangelove, right? We have Anthony Cordesman of Georgetown CSIS, or I guess it's just CSIS these days. Syria's ripple effect. This is also the fateful Washington Post of Tuesday, July 23rd. He argues here that the U.S. should intervene. There are clear humanitarian and selfish reasons for the United States to intervene, even though it's a grim perspective. A couple of words about this as we continue on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Just this Cordesman op-ed here in the Washington Post of Tuesday, July 23rd. This is interesting because the argument is defeatist. Even though he wants to attack Syria, he's already conceding defeat. And the way it goes is this. Cordesman, of course, veteran Strangelove, as we've said, always in favor of war, escalation, mayhem. He points out that Americans are war-weary. The federal budget crisis is severe, many strategic demands. But although Washington cannot guarantee an outcome in Syria simply by arming and supporting the rebels, doing nothing could create a much broader threat to U.S. interests and allies in the region. And what he's saying is the U.S. Clients, in this case, the death squads, the ones put into action by the Negroponte Ford group in the State Department, along with others, those people are defeated. But you've got to make a show of supporting them, because otherwise it's essentially you want to cut your losses. You want to minimize damage. It's a damage control operation in the face of almost certain defeat. And here's the heart of the argument. If Washington arms the rebels and they still lose, the United States will at least have shown its willingness to make decisions and honor its commitments. It will have shown that it will make good on its word and support its allies. Get the idea? We got to go through the motions. We're going to lose. The death squads are doomed, but we got to do it anyway, because otherwise the damage will be even worse, right? We've got to have some skin in the game, right? That seems to be one of the arguments quoted in the other story about how the Kerry and Brennan and Biden are trying to get these senators to vote for this stuff. Now, it's dangerous. Ask Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham down there in South Carolina is facing a Tea Party challenger. And this sharp-witted Tea Party challenger is attacking Lindsey Graham as a paymaster for Al-Qaeda. He's the guy who funnels the money. He's a bag man for Al-Qaeda. And how do you argue that? Because Lindsey Graham, as one of the amigos, is out there with McCain demanding more money for the Syrian terrorists. And that's a hard-hitting argument. And that Tea Party guy deserves some attention there in the South Carolina Republican primary. So there's the situation. And we can now just roll on here. Let's look, first of all, at, I guess we should look at Detroit. The declaration of bankruptcy seems to be holding up in the courts. Some of these things will be appealed. Obviously, when you declare bankruptcy, it cuts in a number of ways, right? You do have the presence of a federal judge, but unfortunately, given the rats cabal, right, Roberts, Alito, Thomas Scalia, and probably Kennedy sitting at the top of this structure, it's perhaps unrealistic to think that any particular restraint in terms of genocidal cuts against retirees, healthcare, social services, and so forth, that may be unrealistic. But I think by now this declaration of bankruptcy is virtually a fait accompli, although one could argue that a debt moratorium, a debt freeze, would have been enough to avoid the bankruptcy. But, of course, then you'd still be under the Snyder-Little Hitler law, right, the emergency bankruptcy or emergency manager law, right, which he successfully rammed through for a second time earlier, late last year after it was overturned in a referendum. We followed all that with the help of people on the scene like Reverend Pinckney. So right now there is this other question that under the Constitution of the state of Michigan, it is unconstitutional, not just illegal with a statute, but unconstitutional with the Michigan Constitution to cut the pensions of public employees. Remember, these people have no other recourse. They were generally not covered by Social Security for most of them. Therefore, the pension cuts are illegal, and that I think that fight that can certainly gain quite a bit of traction. The attempt of the reactionaries is to foist on the public an explanation which goes like this: Detroit was destroyed by Democratic city administrations. Well, that's true enough, but what they're not talking about is Detroit was destroyed over decades by the cretinous, monetarist, anti-industrial executives of General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, people who were interested in paper profits, who sent jobs overseas. We go from 300,000 auto jobs in Detroit to about 30,000. So you lose about 90% of all the automobile jobs in Detroit. This destroys the tax base. This explains how you get into this terrible situation. And there have been studies, and I'm not just talking about Michael Moore with Roger and me. That's a very subjective, superficial one. There have been sociological studies about the mind-destroying conformity of General Motors executives as they advance from Grosse Pointe to Grosse Pointe Farms and all the rest of it. Similarly, we can go back and look at the Flivver King by Upton Sinclair with the incisive portrait there of Henry Ford. Similarly, for Ayacucu at Chrysler. These people are the ones who decided, remember, they made a decision in the 1950s in favor of built-in obsolescence. They said, we're going to deliberately design cars that are junk, that will fall apart after 10 to 15 years and be obsolete so we can sell you another one. And, of course, then Volkswagen and Toyota and Nissan came in with cars which were not designed to fall apart after 10 or 15 years. So there's a complex story here, but the general narrative is the massive U-turn in the U.S. economy started under Carter, continued under Reagan, and in both cases under the auspices of Volcker. If you destroy U.S. industry, then if you drive the interest rate up to 22% on the prime rate, that destroys all exports. That sets the stage for destroying the entire industry. So deindustrialization, the service economy, the post-industrial society, the triple revolution, all of that. And, of course, a lot of that is left and ultra-left, right? The Democratic Party also involved. So what is needed now is a reindustrialization policy and a recovery policy. And it's got to be paid for by the Federal Reserve. We'll be back in just a minute with recommendations for the next head of the Federal Reserve, who it should not be. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We're here in Washington, D.C., urging you to keep up with everything on Tarpley.net and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. So, the Federal Reserve, right? If Helicopter Ben is going to retire later this year, who should replace him? Well, not Larry Summers, not that stooge of finance capital, Larry Summers. The one criterion is we need a head of the Federal Reserve who is committed to opening up a credit stimulus window. It's going to be you can call it the Main Street window, or the reindustrialization window, or the infrastructure window, and it ought to be stocked with, let's say, a minimum of $10 trillion. We need a recovery. We need reindustrialization. Let's start with the tranche of $10 trillion. Remember, for the banks, they had $27 trillion, so I'm not asking for that much. But the idea is there's got to be a credit stimulus window opened up at the Fed where you can rebuild infrastructure, and through that you'll be rebuilding industry, because you'll be reviving your cement, steel, relevant chemical and other industries as you build that infrastructure, right? Rebuild the entire rail, road, electrical, housing, school, and related water projects, ports, canals, and sewage systems, right? We're told here, just in the D.C. area, one county, Montgomery County, $2 billion to rebuild the sewer systems. So all of that, right? There's a wide field. Those investments will have to be made sometime, or human life will come to an end, right? Amidst dysentery, diarrhea, cholera, and you name it. So let's do that, and let's make the Fed finance it. So that's my advice to Obama. Dear Obama, you got to get somebody, doesn't matter who it is, who is locked in, right? Who's got, a commitment that he can't renege on, and you've got to have the blackmail files to make that happen, and I'm sure that can be done. Somebody who's going to say, okay, I'm opening a $10 trillion credit stimulus. I'm willing to buy initially $4 to $5 trillion, minimum $3.6 trillion of bonds from states, counties, cities to rebuild infrastructure, 0% coupon, 100-year maturity. That will get you going, and then you've got to have some other credit resources. You want to restart your space program, your high-energy physics program, and your biomedical research program, and other things that can and should be added along the way. So we're gonna have to fight that one out in Detroit, right? No confidence in the Democratic Party, right? They greased the skids. This poor guy Bing, he's not a fighter. He's pathetic. He's a broken man. Get rid of him. Find somebody in there. We need somebody with the spirit of, say, the young Walter Reuther. Somebody like that has to come out of Michigan. And of course, that guy Snyder, he is a pathetic double talker. You can see how he wrecked Gateway Computer, ran that into the ground, and he's doing that now with Detroit. Who wins out of all this? I'm sure in China they're laughing at this pathetic performance. And then one other thing I'd say about Detroit is what this documents is the incompetence of an entire ruling class, the entire financier ruling elite that runs the United States, that is the ruling class, that has power, are showing that they are incapable. They are simply not capable of managing a country in the modern world. They are blinded by greed, by class prejudice, by their Malthusian inclinations, right? Their hatred of science, their hatred of industry, their hatred of technology, their hatred of blue-collar workers, white or black or any other kind. The most important lesson, fire the ruling class. You cannot let Wall Street money hacks make the main decisions for a society, and that is what they are doing. And this is the libertarians don't get it, and the left libs don't get it either. Both of them strike out on this issue. Now, in terms of the austerity fight, the student loan issue, we're fighting for the Warren-Tierney 0.75% student loan interest rate on Stafford loans paid for through the discount window of the Federal Reserve, 0.75%. The Senate has just passed something that seems to have Obama's approval. It does not have our approval. It's a student loan bill that initially reduces the interest rate to somewhat less than 4%. But this is floating. In other words, it's tied to the rate on the 10% federal Treasury note, and it can go up to as high as 8.5%. So instead of 3.4% where it was, 6.8% where it is now, it could in the future go up to as much as 8.5% on the Stafford loan for an undergraduate. That is unacceptable. And why should it be so? This is market-oriented, and it's for profit. We don't need the market in here. There is no market. The market is a fraud. The market is LIBOR. The market is this guy Steve Cohen of SAC Hedge Fund, who's now apparently indicted. That's what it means to have a market. A small clique of oligarchs who get together to rig and drug the market. No. And, of course, it shouldn't make money, right? Why is this? This is the last place you want to make money to reduce the deficit. Again, that lunatic Republican argument, which Obama has completely capitulated to. So, Obama has gone to Galesburg, Illinois. This was a speech where he essentially rehashes all of his existing policy proposals. But there is something important that, at least from Obama's point of view, this is supposed to represent a left turn. In other words, it's a shift in his rhetorical posture back to where he was, say, at Osawatomie in late 2011 as he was gearing up to fight the presidential contest. He's now gone into a more, dare we say it, aggressive mode. Of course, in the Washington Post of today, we're told that there are some people who are worried that Obama is too aggressive now, that he doesn't want to go too far. He ought to be conciliatory. But believe it or not, this is Obama's attempted assumption of a populist profile. This just shows you how pathetic Obama is. Obama has apparently given up on the grand bargain. Good. If that's true, that's good. We don't want the chained CPI. How can you go to the black community and say, "Oh, I'm for the black middle class and the middle class in general," and then say, "And by the way, I'm gouging your Social Security, your veterans benefits, your other benefits," right? Because a lot of things depend on the CPI. So no to the chained CPI, no to the grand bargain. Forget that. The Republicans are assuming the rhetorical posture of defending the rich, that Obama wants to pull more taxes from the rich to fuel additional government spending. Here we have Boehner, Congressman Boehner of Ohio, says the president wants to raise taxes so he can do more stimulus spending. And the fact is, it's his sequester, and if we're going to get rid of his sequester, we're going to have to look for smarter spending cuts in order to do that. Steny Hoyer for the Democrats says he's marshaling his people, and it's going to be October 1st, and we'll get into this in a second, an attempt to shut down the government and perhaps bankrupt the government by the Tea Party lunatics in the House and indeed possibly in the Senate. So Obama, I would say to Obama, you want to see what a sharp, hard left turn looks like? Look at Bergoglio. Look at the Pope in Brazil, visiting prisoners, visiting drug addicts, visiting the wretched of the earth. That's what a left turn looks like, Obama, not this pathetic penny ante stuff that you're doing. But well, maybe this can go further. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. So welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Much to cover here in the last segment. Let's just look at the budget and austerity situation. Remember, nothing works without a mass movement. Unless there's a mass movement that's anti-austerity, anti-Wall Street, anti-war, anti-dictatorship, nothing else can happen. The ticket to that is the Credico campaign. Randy Credico, 2013, credico2013.org. Volunteer. Go out and gather signatures. Look on that site to find out where signatures are being gathered. Send a contribution. Do something to allow this struggle to go all the way to November, to get into the debates, to force these clowns like Weiner and others to answer. Remember, Anthony Weiner voted for the Iraq War in October 2002. The de facto Iraq War resolution voted for by Weiner. Weiner voted for the TARP, the bailout, twice. Once in September 2008 when it failed. Again in October 2008 when it passed. He also voted for the Patriot Act. So Weiner is a right-wing bum. As for Christine Quinn, she was Bloomberg's person on the city council when Bloomberg wanted to get a third term in violation of existing law. He turned to Christine Quinn, who enabled a third term for the dictatorship of finance capital under the discredited, failed mayor Bloomberg with all of his absurd dictatorial tendencies. And then we have the colorless hack Thompson. So none of these are acceptable. The only breath of life in this situation is Credico, and we'll have more on this. You can catch up with this on tarpley.net, other interviews which have gone more detailed into this. Last night I did one with Tom Kiley on his radio program, and there'll be more coming up, right? We'll be doing the Black Tower in Rochester, New York on 1:30 on Saturday afternoon, and hopefully some others, even in upstate New York soon. Now, concerning the budget, the attempt of Boehner and Company, they've got this Procrustean bed, $988 billion. Total expenditure. The Senate is going for $1.06 trillion, and the House under the Republicans is going $0.988 trillion. What are they doing? One thing is this unbelievable attack on food stamps. This is genocide. They want to take Title I of the SNAP, the food stamp bill, the nutrition part of the ag bill, and block grant that to the states and call that a savings of $125 billion. Remember, the extra expense for somebody like Paul Ryan, who wrote this resolution, is the trip to Nuremberg and your expenses while you're standing trial in Nuremberg for high crimes against humanity. This is genocide against the American people. It is so extreme that even Majority Leader Eric Cantor has to go to their meeting of these lunatics and say, well, look, this is probably a little bit too much. Let's take another one. DARPA, or ARPA-E, Advanced Research Project Agency. The budget for this, and this is where you get things like the Internet, right? One of the main, it's the areas of innovation that are too risky for private capital, right? The private venture capitalist guys, they won't touch it because it's too risky. So the budget for this was... let's see, in the several hundred million anyway. So what the Republicans wanted to do was to reduce the total funding for ARPA-E to $50 million. This would be an 80% cut from the current level post-sequestration. So you find out the answer, X minus 10% of X minus 80% of that equals $50 million. So this is, again, you might as well start studying Chinese so you can take orders in the future. The other thing is, as they say delicately here, what makes the Ryan budget doubly difficult is that it lowers total spending while also tilting the remaining funds to the Pentagon at the expense of non-defense spending. All right. And as if that weren't enough, now we've got the Hill here. July 23rd, Tuesday, once again. Shutdown looms over Obamacare. It is Senator Mike Lee, that wonderful example of the Mountain Meadows massacre, the Mormon extremist. This is somebody who would have been more important under Romney. He would have probably been the majority leader if Romney had gotten in. Mike Lee is he's threatening to shut down the government and indeed bankrupt the government because these things come together over his lunatic attempt to stop Obamacare. Now, why do they care about Obamacare? It's a bailout of insurance companies. It's all these other things. However, for them, what they see in this is that the American people get the idea that they have a right to health care and that somehow Obama and the Democratic Party are the ones who pay lip service to the idea that you have a right to health care, when, of course, our heroes like Ron Paul, Rand Paul say, no, you have no right to health care. You have a right to what the market gives you, and if that turns out to be death, well, tough luck, right? You'll be happy to die in the service of the Austrian school. So Mike Lee, lunatic, this is the guy, by the way, who believes that child labor laws are unconstitutional. This is this Dickensian cruelty. Right now, this is the last stop before Obamacare fully kicks in on January 1st of next year for us to refuse to fund it, says Lee on Fox and Friends. So he wants to sabotage the continuing resolution to deny this, and that will then very quickly run into the debt ceiling. Chris Van Hollen on the Democratic side is telling White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough that the Obama administration has to clean up his act. A lot of people, a lot of Democrats in the House in particular, very angry when that FAA business came up, right? When the wealthy people were unhappy that a 10% cut in the air traffic controllers was making it harder for them to travel. That's when the Democrats said, "Hey, Obama, you should have gotten more concessions. You could have said, okay, I'll give you back the 10% cuts on the FAA, but I want no more cuts in Head Start, no more cuts in WIC, no more cuts in unemployment benefits, right, for the broad masses who are groaning under this Bush and Wall Street economic depression." But, of course, Obama didn't do that. He caved. He didn't force a fight. So that is what the House Democrats are fed up with, what everybody's fed up with. The other thing Obama, of course, needs to do is to roll back the sequester across the board. So that's what we're hearing. We're even hearing that two members of the Republican Senate leadership are going along with Mike Lee, with Ted Cruz, with little Rand Paul, with some others. There's some discontent here by Mitch McConnell. He's afraid, but he doesn't want to show that he's afraid in public. And anyway, you're going to get the idea that the people who are supporting the shutdown of the U.S. federal government, John Cornyn of Texas and John Thune of South Dakota, two prize scoundrels. So this is the kind of moment. If you were a thinker in the tradition of Machiavelli, as we try to be here, you would say, how could I use Mike Lee and his band of lunatics to secure the destruction in place of the Republican Party? Because this could be done. You nail the entire Republican Party to that unpopular, extremist, Dickensian, cruel minority. Portray them in all the horror that they really represent. Don't give them a way out. Nail them. Fight them with vetoes. Fight them with appeal to the public. Right? The dialectic we need is that of the one and the many. Between the one and the many, you crush the few. In other words, the principle of executive leadership and mass support is enough to crush the oligarchical interests. And that's, in a sense, what Bergoglio is showing in Brazil. Now, we wanted to go back to the Fort Wagner anniversary today, or this past week. We also wanted to go through the support for the Copperhead coming from David Swanson. The anniversary, of course, is the New York City draft riots. The paint thrown on the Lincoln statue, was that a libertarian? Who was that? But we'll have to delay that now until next week. And we'll see you. Remember, Credico2013.org.